Gerard Butler reprised his role as Stoic in the live-action How to Train Your Dragon movie, but it's not his first foray into the family-friendly fantasy genre. The Scottish-born star got his start in smaller roles before graduating to leading man status in several major blockbusters in the 2000s. Putting his stamp on the action genre, Butler headlined movies like 300 and Olympus Has Fallen, and consistently proves himself to be an action hero who can turn in a great performance too. However, Butler is also no stranger to other roles, and is deft at comedy as well. Butler lent his voice to the gruff Viking, Stoic, in the How to Train Your Dragon films, and he was perfectly cast as the stentorian figure who doesn't understand his sensitive son, Hiccup. When it came to adapting the animated hit into a live-action film, Butler was one of the few original actors to return to his role. Once again, Butler was the perfect choice to play the live-action version of Stoic, and his dynamic with Hiccup had even more emotional weight in the live-action movie. 17 years before, Butler starred in another family fantasy film, and it's worth revisiting. Nearly 20 years before Gerard Butler appeared in the live-action How to Train Your Dragon film, he got to flex his comedy muscles in 2008's Nim's Island. The whimsical pseudo-fantasy film sees Butler co-star with Abigail Breslin and Jodie Foster as a marine biologist who lives on a remote island with his precocious daughter. When Butler's Jack Russo goes missing while on a research mission, Breslin's Nim strikes up an unlikely friendship with an agoraphobic author who writes some of her favorite adventure books. The movie is mostly made up of Nim's fantasies, and she uses her ample imagination to dream up scenarios involving her fictional hero, Alex Rover. What could have easily been a cut-and-paste family comedy with animals actually strives for something more. While Nim's Island is far from perfect, it manages to surprise, and the main cast is excellent. Butler is correctly cast in his dual roles, and Abigail Breslin is just the right amount of spunky without going overboard. Jodie Foster also turns in a strong performance, and it's rare for a children's film to portray adults with realistic struggles. Though Nim's Island isn't as good as the How to Train Your Dragon franchise, the underrated children's film has similar elements that will catch the eye of fans of the blockbuster series. Like How to Train Your Dragon, Nim's Island is light on the fantasy elements and uses them mostly as spice for the story involving the characters. The dragons are really the most fantastical part of the franchise, and the movies never get bogged down in complex lore or over-the-top scenarios. Likewise, the fantasy in Nim's Island is all imagination, so it doesn't take away from what's really happening. Nevertheless, the island that Nim lives on is still a world of wonder and isn't unlike Berk. The setting for the dragon films is just a bit more exaggerated than in the real world, and Nim's Island is also more playful and whimsical than it would be in real life. Nim also has a deep connection with animals, like Hiccups with dragons, but it isn't really a source of conflict in Nim's Island. Overall, few films are like How to Train Your Dragon, but Nim's Island has too many parallels to be ignored. Stoic is one of Gerard Butler's best roles because he's a complex look at what is essentially an action hero. He's a legendary warrior, but his son, Hiccup, isn't cut out for the Viking lifestyle. Butler plays an entirely different type of dad in Nim's Island, and it shows the actor's range in less serious roles. Jack Russo is a brilliant marine biologist, and he trusts his daughter enough to leave her on the island by herself. Jack has a much stronger relationship with Nim than Stoic does with Hiccup, as evidenced by her fantasy vision of Alex Rover. Butler plays both parts in Nim's Island, and it's telling that when she imagines the fictional hero, he looks just like her dad. Meanwhile, Hiccup and Stoic are at odds throughout the first film in the How to Train Your Dragon series, and that's because the trust isn't there. They both represent two different approaches to a parental relationship, and Gerard Butler is the secret ingredient that makes both films' characters shine.